Investment Immigration Podcast, brought to you by Uglobal.com. I'm your host, Salman Siddiqui. In this episode, we are going to focus on France. Now, France offers this thing called the French Tech Visa, also popularly known as the Talent Passport. Now, what is this all about? A lot of people think that this is just focused on maybe skilled workers, but actually it has separate categories for investors, for startup founders, for entrepreneurs. So in this episode, we're going to focus on this part. And to help us understand the opportunities that are here, I have a very special guest who's also going to tell us how this can lead to permanent residency or maybe, who knows, citizenship in France as well. So to help us unpack all of this, I have a special guest all the way from France. Her name is Clarisse Delaitre. She's an immigration and employment attorney in the law firm Majorelle Avocats. She's based in France. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Salman. Thank you for this nice introduction. Very happy to be here.
Great. So, Clarisse, let's start with an overview of the French Tech Visa for investors. If you could tell us about it, give us a little background and its significance in the French tech ecosystem.
Yes, sure. As you may know, companies everywhere are trying to invest in recruiting the best talents all over the world and to launch great startups. And France has clearly understood the stakes. The country has therefore implemented an active policy to attract talents with French tech. French Tech supports the growth of startups by relaying various initiatives of the entrepreneurs. And the Passport Talent is indeed one of the programs created in 2017, which has the most success right now. It's a way to say that France remains open, welcoming, and ambitious for foreign investors and funders. The golden route for investors and funders to settle in France. And just to highlight that, French Tech, in fact, is an official label which is awarded by French authorities to clusters recognized for their startup ecosystems. And it's also a common brand that can be used by innovative companies in France.
You've given a nice overview of the entire program, but this is a temporary residence permit, right? This is not, something like a permanent residency that you get immediately.
Exactly. However, it has many advantages, and one of them is the duration of this talent passport. Contrary to other long-term visa, the duration is of 4 years. So it's a really great advantage, and it's renewable. So it's a golden route and the best step to settle in France for a long period of time.
What other benefits would you say that investors can expect from this visa?
Yes, as I said, the duration is 4 years renewable. It allows the family to come with them very easily, spouse and children included. So contrary to the other procedures in France, the other ones are really long and complex to make the family come. Here, the main applicant can bring the family. So it's really great. And the spouse, for instance, has the right not only to stay and live in France, but also to work. So it's two advantages. One, you have the right to work in France. There is no English language proficiency necessary. So you don't have to prove having a B1 or C1 level. You have the right to travel in and out France for 4 years and to visit the other Schengen states, for instance, for a period of 6 months per year. And you can, of course, right to seek permanent residence and or citizenship after 5 years. So it's really great.
So moving on, let's also now talk about the financial requirements that are necessary for investors to qualify for this visa. So if you could talk about, the direct investment that one would have to make to qualify for this visa, what is the investment threshold there?
Yes, sure. So to be eligible for the French Tech Visa for investors, so it's really specific, French Tech Visa for investors, you must first be investing at least 300,000 euros in fixed, tangible or intangible assets. That's exactly the definition set by the law. You must either be investing directly or via a company in which you have at least 30% shareholding. Another way is to own at least 10% of the company in which you are investing. So there are several options. And of course, you have to create or to engage protecting job creations in France.
Right. And let's talk about also the application process for the French tech visa for investors. And in that, I want you to explain, if possible, like how does one bring the direct investment of 300,000 euros to the country? Do they have to first set up a French bank account? If they want to acquire shares in a company, do they first have to set up a company there? How does this whole process work?
Yes, it's true that if you have an investment project, you will need to bring your own funds and to show a certificate of deposit of the funds in a personal or business account in a credit institution of the European Union. So this step is quite important, and it's sometimes difficult for a foreigner to obtain a credit account in France. We know the banks that are more open for investors than others that have an international section, and we work closely with them. Of course, it's quite confidential, so I cannot say that, but being supported by the French tech is really improving the process and opens the doors. The application for the French tech visa for investors is handled on a privileged one-to-one basis. You are not lost in the sea. In fact, the French tech mission will review the profile of the investor, the investment history of the investor, and the French tech sends an official acceptance letter stating that the investor is qualified for this program. So it's an individual application, very specific, and some stages that maybe I can briefly explain. The investor has to provide a brief description of the project, of the investment project in France, with some details such as the general goal, the estimated investment amounts, and the targeted sectors. You will have to provide a lot of documents, such as, of course, your CV, the investment track record, the copy of the bank statement showing the funds, a letter of undertaking, and the company's registration certificate. So you have a lot of documentation to provide and really a business plan to build. This is very important. And after that, yes, you can apply directly to the long stay visa to be able to travel and to come to France.
Right. And about this application procedure, you can do that online, right? Or do you have to first come to the country and be here in person? If you could explain that bit.
Yes, sure. The first step is to prepare the visa application from your home country on a website, francevisa.com, the official and only one website that allows you to apply for a visa for France. So you have to choose, of course, a long-term visa with this specific mention for passport talent, French tech, investor. And then it issues the list of documentation to collect and to provide. After that, you will be able to book an appointment to the consulate of the French embassy to give the original documentation and to give your photos, to take your biometric data. And after that, the visa, if there is no issue, is granted, and you can travel to France, arrive, and after that, you will be able to request the residence permit in France on a specific website for foreigners, and you will go to the so-called préfecture in France. It's an administration body in charge of delivering residence card.
Right. And how much time do you think usually it takes? Is it like a year-long process? Is it like a month-long process?
We usually advise to take 2 or 3 months if all papers are already there. And so it can be a little bit longer if you start from the beginning, creating the business plan, finding a bank in France and so on. It can be longer, but the visa application in itself can be quite quick.
Say, for example, somebody is a first-time investor, they don't have a history of investments, but they have the money to make a direct investment of 300,000 euros. Would it be more difficult for them to qualify because they don't have that history? And what do they do then?
It will not be more difficult, as I said, as it is a case-by-case analysis. It's really the seriousness of the project the French tech will and the government will assess and review. And of course, if the candidate is serious, has a good CV with professional experiences that are serious, it's not a problem at all.
If you could also explain to us the role of the French Tech Mission, which plays in evaluating investor applications. So, what are they looking for in an application? That's what I want to understand from you. Is it a particular kind of sector that they would have to invest in? Like, for example, a company which is working on AI or something like that, that will dazzle them, or it could be something simple. What exactly are they looking for there?
The French Tech Mission it's part of the French Tech, and there is no official list of sectors of activities that are more attractive than others. The French Tech Mission does not refuse a file because the company wants to invest in the industry instead of the green sector. So they really assess the global file, and their aim is to help and to advise step by step, and to sometimes to ask for new documentation, additional documentation, if the file has not been well drafted or well processed.
Moving on, let's also talk about the French Tech Visa for startup founders. A lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, so they would like to know how this works and what are the prerequisites for that. Is it very different from the investors? If you could explain that a little.
Okay, the procedure in general is quite similar. The fact to apply for a long-term visa, then to come to France and to obtain the residence card, this process is the same. What is different, of course, is the prerequisites. Startup founders may be granted the talent passport if they provide evidence, for instance, of an innovative business project they want to develop in France. They have also to obtain recognition of the project by a public sector body, and they have to show a sufficient annual financial means, which correspond to the statutory national minimum wage in France. To give you a precise number, it's currently 20,966 euros. So it's really precise, and all these conditions can be found in the French legislation.
I see. So, from what I can understand from you, it seems like there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape involved in terms of getting recognitions and approvals. So, in this whole process, how much time does it usually take? Do you think, a file can be stuck there for months, or?
It can take a little bit more time than the first French Tech criteria, because you have first to seek the support of the French Tech ecosystem. So you have to contact directly the partner incubators and accelerators. So there are maybe 30 of them. Some are very famous, such as Station F, but also some are part of most famous French universities. So you have to contact them, and it takes some time. And so maybe the project needs maybe 6 months to 1 year to be finalized.
But once that is done, then I'm assuming it's a very streamlined process.
Yes, exactly. And of course, as you have the support of the French tech ecosystem, the implementation in France is facilitating. So to access banks, to access social security system, and so on, you will have thousands of people working with you to accelerate the project. The goal of this French tech visa is really to accelerate the business once the company has been created in France. It's quite complex at the beginning, but once you obtain a good support, you can launch your activity quite quickly and you can hopefully be very successful.
Right. Also, I want to understand from you, you said something earlier about job creation when we were talking about the tech visa for investors. So do we have something similar for, the startup founders? Do they also have to create some jobs, or is it something for the investors only?
It's only for the investors. This criteria is not set by the law for the French tech visa for founders. But of course, as a founder, you have to prove that you have a rigorous business plan, very solid, with a clear vision of the competitive market, of what you are going to do in the next years, very basically. So you don't have exactly to say, well, we create 10 jobs in the next 2 years, but it's part of the general overview of the case.
Let's talk a little bit more about this job creation for investors. How many jobs do they have to create through their investment? Is there a set number there? And do they have to maintain that during the period of their temporary residence permit that they get?
The criteria is quite widely drafted in the French legislation. So there is no minimum jobs to be created, no thresholds or things like that. So it's really a statement that the investor is making to the French administration, saying my perspective, my ambition is to create 3 jobs the first year, 10 the next one, 20 the third one. Of course, French government cannot force you to do that. So it's part of the business plan.
Talking about the business plan now, say, for example, everybody comes with great intentions that they're going to launch a very successful business and all of that. But, things don't necessarily go ideally. And sometimes they don't make money and the business is not doing that well. So what happens in that case? Because a lot of our listeners would want to know, do they immediately lose their visa if the business is not going well? Do they get some grace period? If you could just explain a little bit on that.
No. Once the visa and the residence card have been granted, the French government cannot take them back if the business is not as successful as expected. Talent passport is valid for 4 years. But at the end of this first period of 4 years, if you wish to stay in France longer and to renew this residence card for another period of 4 years, of course, you will need to show that you still meet the conditions set by the law to obtain the renewal. The timeline is of 4 years. At the end of the 4 years, you will need again to prove the seriousness of the project. And of course, if you do not meet the conditions again, you will need to change your status and to apply for another residence card in France, if possible.
Right. Now, let's also talk about, for example, what happens after 4 years, the route to permanent residency. So let's talk about that. Is it automatic? Like after 4 years, you can immediately qualify for the permanent residency, or you have to wait a certain number of years? And can this lead to citizenship in France?
Yes, it can lead to citizenship and the end. So as I said previously, you can try to seek a permanent residency or citizenship after 5 years in France. Each route is very different and it's an individual case-by-case analysis, so I cannot give you a global assessment. More generally speaking, it is the quickest way to obtain a long-term residence permit and or citizenship. For the citizenship, it's an individual application, so it's really an independent procedure than the immigration one. You have to apply to the citizenship to ask the French government to grant the citizenship for several reasons, and you have to show your motivation to be a French citizen. So to explain why you wish to become a French citizen, to show that you know the French culture very well, the French history, the French economic system, and of course the French language. There is a minimum level of French to have to be able to obtain the citizenship, and it's not automatic. It's not because you have applied for it and you think you meet all the criteria that the French government will automatically say yes. They have a discretionary right to grant or to refuse the citizenship.
We are coming close to the end of our show, but before I let you go, I would like to hear some success stories of your clients. If you could share an example of someone who came on a tech visa for investors or startup founder, and if you could give their motivation and how they're doing now.
Yes, of course, as a French lawyer, I can give you the name of my client because it is confidential, but I can say that you can find on the internet a very successful story of startups and founders in France. For instance, one of the first companies that benefited from the French tech support called Wishupon, maybe you know them. It's a universal shopping wishlist application that allows you to create wishlists, for instance, and they make a great interview with French tech to explain how easy it was to obtain the French tech visa with the support of the Station F. Station F, and maybe you know that, it's the world's largest startup incubator in Paris. So they are very, very famous. This incubator has opened in the center of Paris. It's huge, and it's entirely dedicated to young tech entrepreneurs that wants to invest in the French tech ecosystem.
Right. And are they coming with their whole families, or do they come individually first? How does that work? And if you could also share some trends about the countries from non-EU places that they're coming. Are they coming mostly from China these days, or are they coming from the US? A lot of our listeners would be interested to know about that.
Yes, sure. It's a very good question. In fact, the French government issued the official statistics of immigration some weeks ago. And so we know that last year, the nationalities that obtained long-term visa for France were Indians, Moroccans, Algerian, Turkish people, Chinese, Russian, Tunisian, and of course, Americans and British people. Just an highlight about that, since the Brexit, for British nationals, they are considered as an Indian, as a Chinese people, so they have to follow exactly the same rules as a non-Euro residents. So it's really a new logic for my UK clients because they were used to come in France very easily, and now they have to follow the full procedures that we were talking about. Sometimes they're coming with the family. A lot of them are quite young startups, and they are used to travel a lot. So sometimes they already have a family, sometimes not. But maybe half of the files are involving the family.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. All right, so we are coming to the end of our show. I'll give you another 30 seconds to make your pitch for the French tech visa. Why you think people should consider this, given the fact that there are a lot of other options in Europe for tech talent. Everybody wants their tech talent from all over the world. So why should they come to France? Go ahead.
Yes, as you may have seen in the newspapers, the French government is currently working on a new immigration bill. This new immigration bill is part of the general politics of France to attract talents, more generally speaking, from all over the world, to invest in France, to develop a great ecosystem